we're 50% of the population, and then even more when you include kids in this. And we're 99% of the victims of AI deepfakes, right? And so I think we deserve to have a voice in this argument. We deserve to have a fight for it.
I'm Laurie Siegel, and you're listening to Mostly Human, a tech podcast through a human lens. Representative Hanson and Molly Kelley, welcome to Mostly Human. I am so excited to be on with y'all today, especially on this topic. Molly, we met years ago talking about deepfake abuse because I was investigating the man behind one of the largest deepfake pornography sites. And you so generously and bravely shared your story of what happened to you and so many of the women in your community. And I just want to say it was a time when people weren't speaking out as much as they are now about it. And I really admired that because I know how hard that was. And so before we jump in to the Minnesota law and what we're going to be talking about today, if you don't mind, could you go back and share a little bit of what happened and you know how we met?
So in 2024, in that summer, I was 6 months pregnant and enjoying my summer at home. I just finished my first year of law school, and the very recent ex-wife of my husband's best friend of 20 years came over and said, I have to speak with you today. And she told us that she had found on her ex-husband's computer deepfaked videos and images of me and many of our close friends, about 80 women. And that was shocking, to say the least. And it ended friendships of 20 years, and trying to understand what the images were and what the videos actually were cracked open endless questions on what to do, how to deal with it, and exposed major gaps in both enforcement of any laws that were on the books. And I came to find showed glaring gaps in actually being effective laws are two different things. And it feels so quaint now to think back to that time, because the technology has spread so rapidly. But 2 years ago, even trying to explain this, I had to draw pictures for people. I had to make flowcharts to try to get people to understand what was happening. It took a lot of time and a lot of mental energy, a lot of emotional energy. I was pregnant and had a newborn. It really took away from what should have been a special time in our life.
I'll never forget when we first met. I had just had a baby.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
I remember talking to you from a doctor's appointment, actually. And it hit me in a different way, knowing I had just had a baby, a young boy, and that, you had just had a baby. And you were talking about this idea that the person next door, right, the person who was in your lives, in your orbit, could have created deepfake, sexually explicit deepfakes of the whole neighborhood, and really digging into how you had to go search for your own abuse online as someone who had been very, specific and careful about who you are out there in the digital world and the psychological impact that had on you. And I will never forget sitting in a hospital room, after talking to you and you saying, does reality matter? And you really wanting to fight for this. And so I just want to, on a human note, years later, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing pretty well. I think at the time I told you that it really felt like the sword of Damocles is hanging over my head. At any point they could, the images could surface and then it's just either I decide to not care anymore or play whack-a-mole trying to find them, which is it's a ridiculous endeavor. And so now I guess I feel a little like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill, because it really has been it's been hundreds of hours of my time doing this.
And so, Representative Hanson, thank you so much for joining this conversation. You're at the forefront of a new law that is trying to address the type of abuse that that Molly dealt with in Minnesota. So before we get to that law, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you both were connected and how you met and what struck you about it.
So I am in the House, which is half of the legislative body in Minnesota, and we have bienniums. So our legislative sessions, we're elected for 2 years, and then we come back and start all over again. And so I was in the second year of our biennium, and in the first year, Senator Aaron May Quaid had done amazing work moving this bill through the Senate side, where Molly and other advocates had come forward and told their story and saw that, the public and the other senators really showed that this was a no-brainer issue. And so in the second year of the biennium, we wanted to really push this through the House. And that was going to be challenging because we are in an unprecedented time here in the Minnesota legislature with a tie in the Minnesota House. So we have 134 members. The theory is that there's always one plus more members than the half. And then so there's one party in the majority. And it just so happened for the second time in state history that we had a tie with 67 Democrats and 67 Republicans. And we had to find a way to really work on issues that were no-brainers and issues that we could all get behind in a time where politics is so polarized and is, especially when we talk about violence against women, violence against children, given what's happening at the federal level with the Epstein files and everything else. And so, I knew this was going to be a challenge, but we moved forward with it. And we had 3 committee hearings, and then it went to the House floor for a debate, and no pushback in any of them. We had tech companies who had lobbyists at the Capitol. And so in theory, if tech companies had a huge issue that this was going to be problematic for, we would have heard from them. We did hear from some about the advertising and some of the other pieces of it. I became a Section 230 expert, which I wasn't expecting, and trying to explain to people why this doesn't fall under Section 230, and that's not a federal law that's going to get in our way. And really being strong about carving out some of the artistic piece of it, making sure we're honoring that. So we made tweaks to the law, but it wasn't anything overhauling or monumentally different. And there wasn't any, clear pushback on what was going to be a problem.
When we look at digital abuse, the landscape has evolved so much, Molly, even over the last couple of years. Representative Hanson, you both know this. And when I investigated this, it was this one, I would say, shady site on the internet that was very influential called Mr. Deepfakes, where they would take the women who did not consent and create hyper-realistic deepfake pornography. There were training manuals that taught people how to do this. They were getting millions of views. 18 million people were going to the site. There was nothing these women could do. The person behind it was anonymous. The laws hadn't caught up. And maybe what's even worse is no one acknowledged that this was real abuse. And so now I think, we have in that time the rise of nudification apps, these apps that make it so easy for folks to digitally undress someone. In a couple clicks, you can digitally undress your crush. If you're a high schooler, it's as easy as ordering an Uber. Despite a lot of these apps being banned in the web stores, they're still easy to access. Some teenagers are being served ads of them. The headline is it's just become rampant. And this is a new type of digital control, a new type of digital bullying. When we had spoken years ago, Molly, both of us were concerned that this wasn't just impacting folks like us. This would impact our young boys. We would teach a new generation that it was okay to create a sexually explicit deep fake of someone. This is really a war on consent as well. RAIN, the national nonprofit that runs the National Sexual Assault Hotline, has said they've seen a rise in the number of children calling about digital violence over the past 5 years. And I want to quote a recent survey from the National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence survey. They said for the first time, it measured tech-facilitated sexual abuse, and it found that 1 in 10 women reported experiencing deepfake abuse. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So Representative Hanson, could you walk us through what this law is aiming to do, and what your hope is, and how all of you crafted it, what you added, what you didn't add? Can you give us a sense of it?
So in Minnesota, it's already a crime to create a non-consensual deep fake of somebody and to disseminate it to 1 or more people. So the only no vote we got in the legislature was saying, well, we should go after the perpetrators. And my response to that representative was, we already have laws on the books that do that. It's already a crime to possess anything that bears the likeness of a child, that's considered child sexual abuse material. So we'd already covered our bases in terms of the possession and dissemination of these things. The challenge then became, how do we go further? And we wanted to go at the root of the technology itself. This technology serves no public good. I've yet to hear a single person tell me what good this feature will serve to the public or how the common good is served by it. And so this will ban the feature, the nudification feature of any apps or technology in Minnesota. So any platform that offers AI nudification, the owners of said platform and technology, if they have the power to turn that off, then they also have the power to be held accountable under Minnesota law. And that's really powerful because it's not just going after the perpetrators of it, it's going after their enablers. It's going after the platforms that are allowing these features to continue to be available. Just as much as we've had bans on other things that are a harm to public good, and we can all think of a million examples of that, seatbelts in cars or whatever it might be, this is one of those things that we wanted to go after. So our law will allow the state to go after the owners of these platforms that don't remove or, deactivate this technology for folks in Minnesota. There's up to $500,000 per download of each image that our state can pursue damages for. And then that money goes into the Office of Justice programs to support victims of violence and, of course, of sexual and domestic violence as well. Secondarily, it bans the advertising of any of these apps. We actually know that these apps are technically not allowed on like the Apple Play Store or the Google Play Store. But at the same time, they're still happening. We know Tech Transparency Project has exposed a lot of that. There was just an article last week about Chinese companies who were advertising these apps on Meta, and Meta had to kind of eat crow and say, yeah, we have not gotten all of them. We've taken down, what they say, 34 million different, posts like this, but there's still more for us to do. And I think that's the position we want to see tech companies acknowledging if they're really on the right side of history. And anybody with an AI platform that claims to be on the right side and doing the right thing should really be examining this. And then the last thing that the law allows is that for anybody who's a victim of this, they can then also pursue damages from those tech companies that allow this to be available to the perpetrator that uses it. So, and again, $500,000 in civil right of action there. So we really feel strongly that we've given both people who are victimized by this an avenue to pursue some kind of justice and damages, because the emotional damage and just the psychological damage, professional damage is real, because digital sexual abuse is sexual abuse. And that's the precedent we want to set. We're the first governing body on the planet to pass this law. And we are going to defend it as much as we can. Obviously, just days before the law went into effect, Elon Musk's company, XAI, better known as Grok, a lot of us know as that, sued Minnesota over this law and asked for an emergency, injunction on this. The judge initially denied that. So even though the law is what it is, we are also still fighting to defend it. I've never seen an issue that's united people around the globe more than this issue, right? The comment sections are the most refreshing things I've ever seen, because we can at least all agree that this is a bad thing. And so I'm glad to see like the law is there, but also the impact the law is having on having more conversations, more news outlets, more journalists, more press, more influencers have shared information about this than anything I have ever seen in this sphere before.
You mentioned Elon Musk, and I'd love to talk a little bit about, the lawsuit. But I do want to play a clip from Carrie Goldberg, who's a victims' rights advocate. And to set up, I think, Elon Musk and some of this battle, I do think it's important to have context. Carrie talked a little bit about what we just talked about, how this has become mainstream, this type of digital abuse. And she was citing Grok. And so to set this up, it's the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. 1.8 million deepfake sexualized images of women over 9 days were posted on X, the social media platform, using the new chatbot Grok. This was described as a mass episode of digital abuse. I want to play how Carrie framed it and get your reaction.
XAI unleashed a new capability where Grok could modify images and nudify people. And then it could post these images on the related platform X. And this was the first time ever that a product that could deepfake was married to a social media platform. And so the dissemination capability was just like a new unheard of level. So it really made it so that deepfakes could be not only produced very simply, but also distributed at scale. And also, I mean, we have to remember that the X platform it's for people 13 and up. So kids could create deepfakes, kids could view them.
I'm curious, Representative Hanson, when you hear that, what are your thoughts?
I work with teenagers at the Capitol who come for what's called our high school page program. So they get a chance to leave school for a week and come be at the Capitol with us every day. And when I brought this up to these young people, week after week after week throughout this year in the 26th second part of our biennium, every single group of students there said that they knew someone or themselves had been victimized by this. And, that's anecdotal to some degree, but I think it just speaks to the fact that this really almost privileged group of kids who know about politics and are interested in being at the Capitol and signed up for this and applied for it were even kids who are being victimized by this. And so when you think about kids who don't have access to that kind of privilege or relationships with their parents or relationships with mentors or with adults that care about them, it really becomes scary for how much it's happening and how much it can affect them for the rest of their lives. Especially when we see kids who are being extorted for this, right? Like a deepfake image is made and then they're said, we're going to send this to your family and all your friends if you don't do X, Y, Z. And so that kind of extortion that's happening is very real. I mean, couple that with the 26,000% increase we've seen in the generation of AI child sexual abuse material, according to the Internet Watch Foundation, and we have a huge problem on our hands. And so I really worry about young people that this is a normalized form of bullying for them that maybe a lot of us didn't have to experience in our youth, but it's something that carries on with you throughout your whole life. And we should protect kids from that kind of thing.
And Molly, I want your take on this. Just to bring it in a personal way, and this is by no means even equal in any way. I just remember it being the time I knew this was going to be an issue. And it was when some technologists asked to do a demo to show me how AI could do something bad, and come up with its own attack against me. And I consented to it. And I said, no problem. I'm happy to show the future of disinformation and what could happen if AI doesn't have the right guardrails. And we did it in front of an audience of politicians and journalists. But the AI came up with an attack to show that I was in a deepfake relationship with Mark Zuckerberg. And they put out fake tweets. They leaked fake audio. That was my voice saying, Mark, I'm scared people are going to find out about us. All of it was, I would say, amusing for folks, a little horrifying for me, but I will never forget the moment. I didn't know they were going to do this, that they created sexually explicit deepfakes of me, and blast them off in front of this audience. And as a journalist and as someone who this was set up in the right way, this was all kind of a demo. This was years and years ago. I remember looking at people look at me. My face was bright red. You can see the recording. I felt so shamed and humiliated, and I felt that whole audience had seen me naked. And because it was real enough that, our digital lives are often our reality these days. And I remember thinking to myself, well, this is horrifying, but imagine if this were our children, and imagine if this were our teenagers. And so, Molly, all these years later, when you see what's happened with Grok and with X and kind of the distribution and the normalization and this turning into entertainment to some degree, I'm curious how this feels to you personally, just having kind of been, you were shouting that this was a problem. This didn't happen publicly to you. Like you had to go hunt for your own abuse, which is equally as horrible. But I am curious, like how it feels when you see that this is now 1.8 million sexually explicit deepfake images and, in a handful of days on Grok, how that makes you feel.
Initially, I felt crazy because I saw this as a 4-alarm fire. And I was just getting silence. And fast forwarding 2 years, what it exposes is the gap. And what I mean by that is that the harm is at the creation of the image, not necessarily only at dissemination. And the laws treat the dissemination as the point of harm. And it's just simply not true. That's like, my husband said, that's like assuming that the only time you're harmed after identity theft is when you find out about it. And that's not true because all of these things are happening in the meantime that are destroying potentially your credibility, or you're being laughed at behind your back, or you don't know where things are and you can't track the provenance of it and the proliferation. It's an unstoppable force, and it's not just at the time when you find out. And it's alarming. And I guess I feel a little less crazy now that people are recognizing it, but it's disheartening. And, the argument in the XAI lawsuit against Minnesota is interesting because it repeatedly assumes that the compelling state interest that it shares is blocking the dissemination of non-consensual deepfakes. And what I really want people to understand here is when Grok or any tech company says we share the state interest of Minnesota, we also don't want the dissemination of. There needs to be an understanding that that's only part of it. That's only part of it. And I would even argue not the worst part of it, because at the time of creation, that's when the Pandora's box opens. You can't control anything. And there's no amount of personal responsibility that will save you from this. I mean, we have somebody in jail in Minnesota right now who worked at an elementary school and used deepfake technology to do this to students. It just happened. And it was a federal case. And if that's one person got caught and prosecuted, how many more are there? It makes tools like Grok Imagine seem without moral, without a compass at all. Because when they had that surge that Carrie Goldberg pointed out, instead of reacting with horror and putting up guardrails, it's my opinion that they said, look how popular this is, supply and demand, and they put it behind a series of paywalls. In their complaint, they say that it takes, I'm paraphrasing, but Grok Imagine is intended for use by anybody, regardless of technical skill, with no creative input of the user whatsoever. It's a push-button technology. And what that does is that creates a frictionless environment for abuse. And most laws don't protect you from just the creation of it for adults. There's arguably, that would be the creation of child sexual abuse material just by the creation. But right now, the Supreme Court is controlled by Ashcroft, and I think it's just going to take a case any day now that will take. I mean, in the opinion of Ashcroft, I think it was acknowledged that someday we're going to get to a point with technology where we can't tell the difference between real and fake, and I think we're there.
Representative Hanson, I want to get into Elon's and others' kind of pushback on this, but I do want to set the stage a bit. I'd love to talk about kind of the federal laws in effect and how this compares. We have the Defiance Act, which passed the Senate but still needs to get to the House floor. We also have the Take It Down Act. It's kind of this like puzzle of protection in the digital landscape. How would you just categorize, like in layman terms, for folks who aren't knee deep in non-consensual deepfake, sexually explicit deepfake laws? Like, how would you explain to them how the Minnesota law compares to the movement on a federal level?
So on the federal level, it is kind of like what Molly was saying, right? It focuses on the dissemination, the posting, and the people's responsibility in creating it, right? We're very specifically targeting the people providing the technology to do it. We all, Citizens United says that companies have voice and free speech and all these things, but that's not the case here, right? There's a person behind the technology. There's a person deciding if they can make this feature available or not. This is not going to be something that the existing federal Take It Down Act or the pending Defiance Act are going to address. So our law will be introduced hopefully in at least 12 other states in the next legislative session as those roll out there. And we would love to see federal action on that as well. And I think as we talk about conversations about making sure that VAWA stays protected, and we have other things about protecting children from sexual abuse and federal charges, like what we saw here in the Minnesota case that Molly mentioned, we have to also talk about, like, this is an additional federal action that we would like to see. We're 50% of the population, and then even more when you include kids in this, and we're 99% of the victims of AI deepfakes, right? And so I think we deserve to have a voice in this argument. We deserve to have a fight for it. And we also know that policymakers who have tried to address this, say in the UK, for example, the same day that we received the lawsuit from Musk's company, there was a suit filed in the UK by a UK lawmaker who had been nudified into a video. And forgive me for like the graphic nature of it, but it was a video of her being chloroformed and prepared to be raped. And as policymakers who step into this space, we know that there is like a huge risk that goes into standing in this spotlight. My own daughter has talked to me about like what does this mean, Mom, that you're standing out and talking about this? And she's an adult now, but she still has the same concerns about, what does this mean for those of us who do stand up and fight back? Because for too many years and centuries in this, on this planet, when women stand up and fight back, there's generally a consequence for that. And so I think that having the federal partnership and having a federal law around this is really important, not just for the protection of people who could be victimized, but for the protection of people who are fighting for this, Molly and other advocates and other people, yourself, everybody who's standing up and doing this. If we don't have that kind of support, I do fear that we won't be able to get there. So when you're voting, you should be asking your elected officials where they stand on this. If you have a chance to talk to a congressional or Senate representative, ask them about this. State level executive branch officials, anytime you can have that conversation to talk about this. Obviously, the conversations that Paris has had at Congress are extremely powerful. And so continue to support people who have platforms to tell this story and support them in the way, even if it's just, you got this, girl. Like, we believe in you, right? This solid sisterhood, I think, is going to be really important as we go forward.
And I would love to have you address specifically some of the criticism, because to give some context to listeners, right as the law was set to take effect, Elon Musk and XAI filed a lawsuit citing free speech concerns and broad overreach. The lawsuit was filed just 72 hours before the law was implemented. So I'm curious, a little bit about the criticism. It stated that the law imposes an overboard content-based ban on free speech and the tools of visual expression in a clumsy attempt to prohibit nudification. Not just Elon Musk, some others, including the ACLU, voiced some concerns with the idea that the law applies regardless of consent, that it's too broadly defining intimate parts. I would love that it could end up being a slippery slope and censoring speech, especially depending on who's in office. So I'm curious, I'd love to give you the opportunity to respond to that directly.
So the definition of intimate parts in our statute refers right back to our sexual exploitation and sexual abuse statute. So it's no secret what this is referring back to and what the context of intimate parts is there. So we're confident that we have clearly, cross-referenced that statute in a way that is meaningful with legal experts, including legal experts that Molly and others brought to the table as well. We've had First Amendment lawyers really deep and involved in this, and we have one of the best attorney generals in the country. So I think I'm really confident in the way that we crafted this law. It went through several committees and not a single vote no against it in the Senate and only one vote against it in the House, which that person went globally viral for said no vote at no push of anybody else. Just organically, the public responded to that. So, I think if this truly was such a huge issue, they have lobbyists at the Capitol, never came up. Right? This was never an issue that brought up. There was 2 years to do that. Obviously, the public pushed back on it, like outside of the legislative actions. Still, like Molly had mentioned, no pushback on it. They've just put it behind a paywall sometimes and just kept continuing to promote it. So there's really not any clear, I think, compelling argument. I don't think this is speech. I think there's a good case to be made that nudifying an image without somebody's consent is not free speech. Like this is not a content thing, right? This is a conduct that we're talking about. And we're not trying to go after the artistic capacity either. We have a carve out for technical skill that we worked with Adobe on, and they obviously own Photoshop, and it was important to us that, we're not trying to regulate art. There can be art out there, and I may not like it. It may not be tasteful to me, but that doesn't change the fact that the artist has that right. And we've addressed that. And so I'm very confident that our statutes will uphold the argument as well. And I think there's a compelling public interest on this. And we're going to continue to do more. We're going to continue to push that other states introduce this law. So if he's going to come after us here in Minnesota, he better be ready to go after every other state legislature that's going to introduce it too. And he better be ready to go after the federal government and be ready for a Supreme Court challenge, because I think that's what's in the future for this. We're ready to defend this for as long as it takes, and we're not going to back down.
Is it intimidating to be on the other side of Elon Musk?
Yeah. I mean, I guess he said a few things, and I haven't even looked at this to see it, but he said things like the representative and things like that. Like, I don't have a name. I think just further explains kind of what the people who are standing up about this really face. I've been fighting to protect kids for most of my adult life. I became a mom when I was 17, so all I know how to do is be a mom in my adult life. And protecting kids is just something that comes naturally to me. I was a kid who wasn't very protected, that needed adults in my corner. And so I've committed my life to making sure that I'm doing my part to do better and to kind of build a better legacy than what was left for a lot of us. And so modeling being brave and modeling being bold and not mean, right? We're not being mean about this. We're not insulting him. We're not, coming after his character. I think that'd be probably pretty easy to do if we wanted to, but that's not the point, right? The point is talking about how very powerful people can kind of think that the world is their oyster like this, and that it doesn't really matter who is harmed by the things that they feel like they want to do it. And that's just not the way that society works. I think the other thing to highlight, maybe bigger than Elon Musk, is that when any government allows corporations to do whatever they want, I think this is a really good example of the kinds of things they'll do, right? When there are not guardrails around keeping corporations more responsible and accountable to the common good, they'll do things like allow children to be exploited. They'll do things like allow women to be exploited. They'll allow digital sexual abuse like this. And where's the morality in that? And we have as humans, kind of something to face with ourselves of what does the future of morality look like when it comes to technology? And obviously these conversations happen. We hear Anthropic talking about it. We hear OpenAI talking about it. Like, what is right and what is wrong? And so to return to kind of these core values and core conversations of philosophical morality, I think is good for us to some degree, but we have to be able to make a decision and move forward, not just perpetually sit in a space as if this is a discretionary thing to, think is right or wrong, or we'll just sit in the middle on it. I don't think that's acceptable. And so for me, I tend to be kind of a black and white person. And so when I'm fighting for something that we know the people need us to fight for, that's what we're really going to go forward with. So I wish sometimes I didn't have to feel the fear of it, but I also know that the people who have been victims of this have had to feel far more than I've had to feel, and so I will join them on that list, if you will, or that pain. I'll join them in that if it means that we can create change and protect more people.
First of all, I always come to this from the standpoint of always deeply concerned about victims. This is how I spent my career. Telling stories and trying to, when we talk about Molly, when you're like, everyone thought I was crazy, I really love to be the person that doesn't think you're crazy when you're saying this thing that seems almost like crazy. So I say that to set up this other part of, I really think we're at a unique moment in time with artificial intelligence. On one hand, you have a new digital landscape that requires bold new laws, and some other laws might feel like they're getting outdated as we see technology accelerate. And on the other hand, you have people deeply concerned about the democratization of the internet and free speech and protections and the slippery slope and how things are getting politicized and whose agenda. It can be an and so what I would love to do is I want to play you a little clip from Taylor Lorenz. She's an internet culture reporter. She has a very specific point of view. But then what we'll do right after is I also want to play Carrie Goldberg and her response to that. And then I'd love to hear both of your responses, if you don't mind.
Are we going to have a free and open internet, or are we not? And for 30 years, we did have a free and open internet, and we are switching back to a version of the internet that frankly is incompatible with democracy. And that's what really scares me. And when you look at the political effort aimed at pushing laws like this, it is not a democratic. These are not pro-democracy people that care about civil liberties. It is fundamentally a very, a very authoritarian sort of regulatory scheme that we're seeking to enact on the internet. And that is why it's primarily driven by these extremist organizations. Again, I'm not talking about the Minnesota law. I'm talking about the broader shift to shift this liability onto platforms at a time. I can't stress this enough. At a time when anybody can build a platform. We could have this way more democratic and open software landscape where we challenge big tech. And are there bad actors? Yes, we'll go after them. Are you misusing it to do bad things? Yes, we can go after people that are doing harm. I will tell you, I know how these laws that were put on the books 5 years ago and 10 years ago are being weaponized, have been used to silence speech. I have had my content taken down. And if you care about regulating big tech, which I certainly do, why is it that you are ignoring all of these other laws that would actually curb the power of big tech? You're ignoring all of those. You've never advocated for any of those. You're not talking about them at all. They're not even on the table. The only thing that's on the table are these speech restriction laws. Ask yourself why that is.
Before we get your response, I'd love to play Carrie Goldberg's response to that.
In my opinion, that's a very privileged position. I represent people's lives that have been overturned, if not ended, because of harms that happen on the internet. I represent a 13-year-old who was induced into suicide by somebody on the 764 platform. I represent 35 families whose children were sold and delivered a suicide kit from Amazon. People and children who've been allowed on dating apps and then raped by adults. Certainly, we're not dealing with an internet that works for everybody. The last 30 years under the CDA have been an experiment and one that I feel has failed because these platforms have basically been immune from liability. And the cases that do get through are getting through that immunity because these platforms are not being held accountable as publishers, but as defective products. So they're not being held liable for their own speech.
Okay, so two very different points of view. And y'all both are in this in a very specific way. So I'm very curious for your response.
So I have a couple. The democratization of the internet, if I'm understanding her correctly, she's saying that by allowing these laws that target speech, it is essentially like squelching speech on the internet because people are afraid to speak out, and where anybody can be a creator and anybody can have a platform. That is a point of view to take. But my question is, like, whose civil liberties are we going to value at this point? Because laws really are sort of a reflection of our values. And if it's not to be protecting the harms that are actually like very, very real and happening to millions and millions of almost exclusively women and children, over the possibility so that everybody can have a voice and everybody can have a platform on the internet, I think is not true. First of all, I do agree with Carrie that it's a privileged position to think that anybody, the internet's for everybody, and we can all be out there. That is simply not true. It's also very privileged to say, like, if there are bad actors, sure, we'll go get them. Who's the we? Who's the we there? Because I can point to hundreds and hundreds of women who would love to know who the we. Where's the cavalry coming to fix it and to save us, because it's not there. It's not realistic. And, you know, as far as the Minnesota law, for example, somebody had to be first. And I'm very proud that it was Minnesota. If there are legitimate arguments as to, you know, the definition, and if it sweeps in too much speech, then so be it. Then argue about it. Bring it to court. Let's hear it. And if it has to go down and be edited and come back, it will. But it's already going to happen. There are other states watching to see how this goes, and they will they will proceed with their own laws, tailored maybe a little bit differently, because they're going to learn from this. So I think it is, it's skipping a big part of the conversation to assume that laws like Minnesota's are choosing between consensual and non-consensual notification. An automated tool cannot reliably tell. And the Minnesota law drew a line at the automation itself and deliberately left other available avenues for consensual image, intimate image creation. It doesn't prohibit consensual sexual expression as a category whatsoever. The last thing I wanted to say is that the first speaker said that, the civil liberties are going to be dampened and darkened. And I would like to know where mine are then. Because if we're not going to allow any laws like this, and if we're not going to allow tech companies to be held accountable, then where are my equal protections under the law? XAI, I just thought it was interesting how they postured themselves, where they said that the user doesn't have any creative input and anybody can do this. Well, doesn't that make XAI a creator then? And if they're a creator, then by all means, now I don't think you can as easily hide between Section 230 anymore.
I guess my question for you, Representative Hanson, going off of what Molly just said, as long as I've covered technology, Section 230 is like, it's like, you talk about just getting this real education in Section 230. It's like when you cover tech, it's like, okay, the platforms are not liable for what goes on them. Like this is as long as I've been covering technology, it's been Section 230 shields them from liability. I think we are at an interesting moment. And I recently interviewed Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI. When I interviewed him, I asked him if he thought the future AI companies were at risk of being, held more liable for the impact of their products. Now that we see AI impacting humanity in such an extraordinary way, his answer surprised me. I'm going to play it for you really quick, and then I'd love your response. A big moment happened recently, which is a California jury found Meta and Google were liable in damages for harmful and addictive platforms. It's the first time that the social media has been treated as a defective product from a design perspective. I'm curious what the outcome of this case means for AI companies like OpenAI.
I think society is going to decide that creators of AI products bear a tremendous amount of responsibility to the products we put out in the world.
Is this a sign of things to come, Representative Hanson?
I think that there's profit to be made in doing the right thing. And I think that once companies start to see that and recognize that's where they'll start to go. That's my vision for the future, right? Is that, like you said, that society is going to drive a lot of this. And, in response to what we heard from the first commenter there, I guess I'll start to take advice about democracy from somebody when they show me that they have experience working in it and they have a dearth of knowledge there, because I tend to not gravitate towards or agree with those perceptions of folks who don't have their areas of study or their education and experience and, decades of experience in democracy work, right? Because what is democracy? Democracy is where the people decide. It is the power to the people. It is a type of justice coalition that people just inherently and kind of intangibly create by voting and electoral policies and influencing outcomes and organizing, right? And so for me, I really see that this law is narrow, right? This is not overreaching. It is very narrowly targeted at a specific feature. And we're not ignoring anything. And I think that's actually kind of insulting, honestly, as a policymaker, because there's a lot of weight on our shoulders. I know that politicians are the second most hated people next to used car salesmen. So it's really hard to listen to us and trust us. But I think when we realize what kind of people are going into politics now, it's single parents like me who said, I want to help build a government that works for us. I want to build a government that we can count on. I want to be part of the solution. And so as we're entering into this new age of trying to legislate around something, I think back to the legislators and the leaders who had to lead us through eras of regulating child labor laws and child marriage, where just because the absence of a law was there, it didn't make what was happening okay. And we can use 100 different examples here. And I just don't want to leave anybody out and go into too many of them, but that doesn't mean that it's okay to happen. And so as we kind of go into this new age of trying to legislate this novel new challenge that the internet is presenting and tech is presenting, we are asking ourselves, at what cost? Because the point of government, I think, is that, it should be doing the most good for the most people, not that it needs to enable anything or be something like, and a Reagan style, we're from the government and we're here to help. I'm not pitching that at all. But I do think that government has a responsibility to again, do the most good for the most people. And the part that's really hard for me is that as a politician, I have a master's degree in advocacy and political leadership. I teach in the same program, my alma mater. And what we talk about there is that the public feedback should be driving what we're doing, right? It should be telling us and informing our things. My job is to represent the majority and to make that voice heard, right? The majority has spoken loud and clear around the planet, outside of just my constituency, right? That says this is what we want to see policies makers working on. So we see a problem, we see a pain, we see the injury of it. And then our job is to figure out, what does that alternative future look like with this problem solved? And if we really sit in that space and we say the reality could be that there are not as many pedophiles preying on our children. We know that even though it's a AI child sexual abuse material is there, people try to say it's victimless. We know the data actually tells us that it only further pushes pedophiles to cause more crimes, and they escalate. There's a tipping point of the satiation, right? It doesn't actually satiate anything. So we know that there's policies that can get us to a world where that's not the norm anymore. And that's the plan we're putting on the table. That's the better future we want to build. I think the last thing I would say is that, when I hear a lot of these kinds of hesitancies, it just I have to be soft and gentle and forgiving and understand that a lot of people are new to learning what Minnesota is about and what it means to us to be a Minnesotan. I think we've been on the national stage enough for you to see how we responded to Metro Surge when, the federal government sent armed thugs to harass and kidnap and harm and assault our neighbors, cause trauma in our children. My community specifically was one of the most targeted by that, right? There's other things that have happened because of that. And if we haven't shown the nation that what it means to be a Minnesotan is to lead and fight back against injustice and unrighteousness, we have more to do, because our mission is to show the world that we are a North Star. We stand no matter what it is. We will fight back, and we will always keep each other safe. And if we have to lead in a way that looks like this, sign me up every day. I'll be at that front line. I'm a kind of prodigy of women who came before me in Minnesota that taught me how to do the right thing, no matter what it looks like or how hard it is. And here we are now as a state with all of our top tickets as our women, right? We are going to continue to do that. So welcome to seeing what Minnesota looks like, because we're not going to stop. And we hope more people kind of see that and do the same thing for their own people too.
I love hearing your passion for it. And it's really, I would say, when I was trying to cover Mr. Deepfakes and trying to convince people that this mattered years ago, it was really hard to get folks to pay attention. And it's why I found folks like Molly. And I'd love to end with Molly. And I'll set this up, Molly, to say, I remember for years, I shouted into the ether to say, hey, there's this site. It's teaching young men how to do this type of abuse. They're training manuals that are teaching people how to deepfake. There are people talking about deepfaking classmates. Millions of people are going. It's top of their Google search. It's horrible. It's ruining reputation. It was almost crickets. I think I tried to get an executive at a streamer to try to pay attention to the story, and he said porn doesn't do well on the platform. And I said, this isn't porn. This is a new form of digital abuse. / I'll wrap it around in a true crime story for you for entertainment purposes. But it really was, I remember how frustrating it was. And then when I met Paris Hilton, and we ended up putting out our series with Paris Hilton and on her TikTok channel, searching for Mr. Deepfakes, I hope people will watch it, because I think it's really, it's a passion project and hopefully educates people on the human impact of this issue, which is the most important part of it. I remember her team asked me to testify for a law in California on a state level, SB 1111, that would give victims more protections. And I'll never forget, for me personally, having had no one want to listen, sitting there in front of lawmakers and and thinking, look at me. Now you have to look, like, please look. And it was so interesting because the female politician up there was like the first to be like, okay, this is really scary. But it was such a moment. And I haven't lived this in the personal way, Molly, that you have. And so I really, from an empathetic standpoint, I wonder, for you now fighting for a law, fighting for this law and advocating for it, if you feel like you have gotten power back, if you feel a sense of agency that you lost when this happened to you years ago.
Yes, but I guess. I wanted to say that when you contacted me, it was one of the several injections, I guess, that I desperately needed to hear that I wasn't making a big deal out of nothing. Because it got really lonely when it was so quiet and nobody cared, because I couldn't believe that nobody cared. And along the way, there have been small moments, and you are one of them. Actually, they've come mostly from journalists in the beginning, where somebody would care, and that's what has kept me going, really, to hear. So thank you for everything you've done on this topic. It has gotten less frustrating, but actually I've noticed just in the past 6 months, it's gotten alarming in a different way, because I do truly feel like if people really knew, if you really understood on a just citizen-wide, coast-to-coast level, if they really understood what was happening, there would be an uproar, and everybody would be on board. And I would like people to understand how much agency they have, and that phone calls do work, like really well. Phone calls work, and to care. But what I've learned is that we are all extremely siloed into what we see and hear about other jurisdictions, other states, other stories. Laurie, I did not know that you were speaking on the behalf of a law in California, but you'd think I would, right? Yeah. Of all people. And to come full circle, it kind of goes back to why the democratization of the internet isn't real. It isn't real because we are still siloed by the algorithms, and you only see what they want you to see. And it's not even enough to be viral anymore, because that doesn't even happen organically anymore. That's clipped and chosen. So what we are allowed to see is what's served up to us. And it's really hard to break through that. And that's the new frustration, I think, is it's a different level of public awareness that is difficult to achieve. But in some, yes, I feel like I've gotten my agency back. There are 2 advocates that have been just equal partners across the board, Jessica and Megan, and none of this is possible without them. And I really feel like Senator McQuaid and Representative Hanson have been like true partners to really learn and understand. I'm proud of what we've done.
Well, I would end this with saying, I think frustration has been a driving force for so many of the folks I've met throughout my career who are in the arena. And we will be watching closely this law and what it means for folks, not just in Minnesota, but all around the world. And thank you all for the time. I really appreciate it. I know these things aren't easy breezy things to just chat about. So thank you so much for taking the time and breaking it down and answering some of those questions on it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great.